Hello, welcome to Focus Today. I'm your host, Perry Atkinson. We've got a couple of great guests for you today, and our first guest is Constantina Palmer, and she's authored a book called Lessons from a Woman's Monastery, and the things that she experienced while traveling and going to those. And our own Polina had a chance to talk to her. And then after we talk to Constantina, we're going to have, we look forward to having one of our legislative updates in here to give you an idea what's going on in the Oregon legislature. Dave Dotterrer will be with us. But right now, let's talk to Constantina.
Well, a couple of years ago, 60 Minutes did a wonderful documentary on Mount Athos monastic community there. And Greece has been in the news recently about its financial crisis. And like I said, we've heard about the men's monastery there. However, not much had been said and shown about the women's monastery that exists in that Orthodox country. Well, joining us today is Constantina Palmer. She is the author of The Scent of Holiness, a beautiful book about her pilgrimage to Greece and her visits, several visits to different monasteries. So welcome, Constantina. I'm very glad you're joining us today.
Thanks for having me.
Tell us, let's start just, tell us why you became interested in those monastic communities and what prompted you to write this book.
Well, even before I moved to Greece, which was 5.5 years ago, my family and I had visited monasteries here in North America. And so in Greece, I thought since we were there to take the opportunity to visit as many monasteries as I could. And so I started visiting a couple of the women's monasteries that weren't very far from the city I lived in, Thessaloniki. And so I just kind of kept going back. I developed relationships with the sisters, and I really enjoyed it. So after sort of reflecting, after a couple of years of having gone frequently, I started to reflect on all the things that I learned, and I decided to start to write some things down. And in the beginning, I didn't anticipate it becoming a book, but that's how it turned out. And I decided, I felt like I had been blessed so much by visiting the monasteries that I felt like I wanted to share those blessings.
What is it about the monasteries that made you want to go back there?
I would say that it's the way that you can really feel the presence of Christ in the midst of a monastery, and in particular the way the nuns themselves act and react, that you see this constant sort of living out of the gospel precepts. And so for me, it was, you know, if I wanted to be the best Christian I could be, I wanted to be around the people who live the gospel as much as possible, so that I could learn to do the same thing. And that's what I found with the sisters, that, you know, the commandments of the gospels, that they would keep them and they would struggle to keep them. And just by being in their presence, these were the things that I began to sort of pick up on and begin to see and begin to try to imitate, though I still have a long way to go.
Now, you visited several monasteries, even though your book is written as if it's taking place in one particular monastery. What, if you could kind of combine and look at the universal qualities that all these places shared, can you just outline a few?
Yeah, there are different types of monasticism. There's only three. It's not like Roman Catholicism where it has different orders. And the monasteries that I went to were Cenobitic monasteries, which is a community that shares all things in common. So they eat, work, and pray together. And the monasteries that I went to, these were all this type. But even when they're different kinds, like there's a Diarrhythmic where people sort of, each individual monastic does his own schedule. But the universal qualities that are in all Orthodox monasticism, really the basis of it is the vows that they take. And an Orthodox monastic takes the vow of chastity, poverty, and obedience. And these are universal qualities that you find no matter where you go within Orthodox monasticism.
Now, with the, I've been to a men's monastery, and I've been to a women's monastery, and I know that there is such like a stereotype out there in the world that all monks do is pray, and some people even accuse them of doing nothing else, and that there's just this lazy people who escape the world, who escape the hard labor, and then they hide in these monasteries and do nothing. Now, when I went to a monastery, I found nothing but hardworking men. I mean, was that the case there as well, where you went?
Yeah, absolutely. I've never seen anything like it. And the nuns work nonstop, constantly. So much so that a lot of times men who come to help them say, I can't keep up with them. They work too much, I can't. It's too much for me to be able to keep up with them because they work long hours and they work hard work. Because they're self-containing, they're self-sort of supporting monastery community, so they have to work in order to live.
Mm-hmm. Well, can you describe just a day at a monastery? What do they do besides, obviously there is prayer involved? Just walk us through the day.
So depending on the community, they'll get up at a different hour in the day, but generally they always begin in prayer. So monastics have a personal prayer rules that they keep on their own, that, you know, it may vary what it consists of, but they keep that on their own. On top of that, they do regular services together as a community in the church. So a lot of times they'll begin with matins. They'll do the office of hours, evening prayer, compline, and in between these time periods of prayer, they will work. And even while they're working, they're praying the Jesus prayer, different things like that. And then a lot of times they'll eat at least one meal together, a formal meal, which at least in Greece is the noon hour meal. And this meal is accompanied with spiritual reading, and they keep silence until the reading is finished. And it's very formal. It's almost like a church service. And then they'll go back to work, and then they'll have, in the evening, it depends. Some sisters eat, some won't. They do whatever they can according to their strength. Again, they'll go back to the church and have prayer services. And then again in the evening, a lot of times they'll do their prayer rule then, either in the morning or in the evening, in between hours of sleep. That's generally the type of routine that a day would have in a monastery.
So it looks like prayer, I mean, obviously prayer is perhaps the most important thing that they do throughout the day. And I found it interesting that your book is divided not in chapters, but in 33 knots. Right? Can you explain to those who are not familiar with the prayer ropes and what those knots represent?
Right. So Orthodox Christians generally, and particularly monastics, practice an ancient prayer that's founded in the scriptures, this statement, Son of David, have mercy on me. So this prayer is called the Jesus prayer, and it has different variations, but the most common would probably be, Lord Jesus Christ, Son of God, have mercy on me. And so we say this prayer in order to keep our hearts and minds focused on Christ and to pray unceasingly. And in order to help us remember to say the prayer, we often have prayer ropes. And the 33 knot one is this one we usually wear on our wrist. And of course the 33 knots represent, the 33 years that Christ lived on this earth. And so because the stories in the book are independent, I decided to call the chapters knots so that each story that's within the chapter is sort of like a strand of yarn. Together they're a knot, and all together they're the 33 knots that symbolize the prayer rope. And in that way, it also kind of symbolized this prayer of thanksgiving that I had, to God for having given me such blessings from visiting these monasteries.
So the knots, the chapters in the book, you have a compilation of stories, right? Some of them are lessons that you've learned. Some of them are stories from the nuns. Is that correct?
Yeah.
All right.
Yeah.
Now, the nuns, those sisters that you've met and that you've become friends with, tell us about them. I know that you probably don't want to share all, some stories are maybe too personal, but who are these women? Why do they abandon their life and become monastic? Because it's a commitment. It's a different life.
Yeah. Some of them were veterinarians. Some of them were pharmacists. Some had just finished university. A lot of times they'll come before they finish high school. There's even some nuns that I knew who became monastics before even finishing junior high school. And they come, a lot of times they'll come from totally different backgrounds. Some had, grown up very faithful. Others didn't have much to do with the church at all. But in the end, the main thing that they all have in common is that once, at some point in their life, they felt this irresistible desire to become a monastic, to live in the monastery. And they get it at different times. There are some women who were even married, and they decide with their husband to separate and to become monastics. And so, at the end of the day, the main thing that binds them together that you can see all across the board is this: they weren't able to deny this desire that they had to leave everything behind and to come to the monastery to live for Christ as much as they possibly could by leaving everything else behind and all the distractions of the world.
Now, it is very biblical. You leave your father and your mother, and so they enter the monastery. Now, can they still see their family? Do they have some ties with their family still?
Yeah, most of the time they're still completely normal with their families. They have no problem. The family comes to visit them. They talk on the telephone. Unfortunately, there's times when the family will reject, and this happens actually quite frequently in Greece, at least in the beginning. A lot of times the parents will be against the child's decision to become a monastic, and they'll not talk to them, or they'll even try to make them leave the monastery. But over time, these things usually get worked out, and the only thing is sometimes if the family refuses to talk to the monastic has the obedience of calling the family and writing the family and keeping in touch so that the family doesn't become embittered towards them.
And then I would assume that the monastery becomes the spiritual family, and the head nun becomes a spiritual mother, right? And then they have spiritual fathers.
Yeah, absolutely. It's very much like a family, and the sisters are very much like sisters.
All right. Well, the subtitle of your book is Lessons from a Women's Monastery, and I do want to talk about the lessons that you've learned. So after the break, we'll talk about that. One last question before we go into the break. Did you find that the women's spirituality differs from that of men, or because you've probably, you've visited different monasteries, but you chose to write about the women's. So is there a difference?
I wouldn't say that the spirituality itself is different. There is no male or female in Christ, but definitely the approach, I would say, is different. So, men are a little bit more austere, and women are a little bit more subtle in their approach to holiness and to asceticism and things like that. And Abbas had once said to me, men try to cut the rope with an axe in one blow, and women slowly work away at severing it. And I think that that is a really good description of the difference between how nuns go about the spiritual life and how men do it. It's subtle. But at the end of the day, yeah, it's the same spirituality. It's the same Christ they are struggling to acquire.
Oh, wonderful. Thank you. Let's take a break, and then when we come back, we'll talk about the lessons that you learned. We'll be right back. Hi, I'm Paulina, and I work at theDove TV. Did you know that when you support theDove TV, you have a profound impact, not only in our community, but around the world? It's your continued support that takes the inspiration and hope in the programs we produce and makes them available to the thousands of people who are watching these videos online every week. Help bring encouragement and hope to our valley and beyond by making a secure online donation today at our website, thedove.us. Welcome back. Today we're talking to Constantina Palmer, the author of The Scent of Holiness. It's a beautiful book, collection of stories about women's monasteries in Greece. And Constantina went there for several years, studied at the university, and then compiled different stories, and here we have it, this book. Constantina, we've talked about spirituality and the life at a monastery. Now I want to go to the lessons that you learned. And I want to start with the first one. There was the story that you mentioned in your book, how the nuns received an order of black jackets. Can you tell that story and the lesson that came from that?
Sure. So it was the first time I had visited the monastery, this particular monastery, and the sisters had ordered a bunch of jackets for all the nuns in the sisterhood. And when they took them out, they saw that all the sizes were wrong. And one of the smallest nuns came out, and she tried on one of the jackets, and it was still too small. And immediately I felt horrible. These jackets, I think, had been sent from America, and there was this great distance, and I felt really bad for them because they were going to have to send them back. And the nuns just laughed about it. To them, it was like no big deal. They just shrugged and went back to work. And I remember making a very big impact on me because nobody got upset. Nobody blamed anybody else. It was just, for them, okay, it was an inconvenience at the most, and that was all. And that was very impressive to me, that they could deal with such, to me, what would be a very big inconvenience, and they dealt with it with such grace.
You mentioned laughter, and that was the revelation I had with the nuns or the monks I had met, that they're not this boring, closed people. They're very joyful. They're very lively. They have a great sense of humor usually. And from what I hear and from what I read, that this was your experience as well, right?
Yeah, absolutely.
How's that helped them in their daily struggle?
Yeah, it absolutely helps them in their daily struggle, because it isn't always easy at the monastery, and it isn't always, every day isn't a bright day that has no problems. There's lots of problems that come up. And so the humor that the sisters and the fathers have is very good and helpful to help the environment feel lighter. But it's not crass, it's nothing inappropriate. It's very much like a child who takes joy in simple things and takes delight in sort of funny, simpler things. Nothing that's harmful or even degrading to somebody else. They tease each other, but in a very loving way. And this all helps with the environment of the monastery. A lot of times people have the impression that, even in St. Gregory Palamas's time, I remember they would say, oh, if you go to see monks, you'll see that they're just bent over looking at their navel, meaning that they're bent down praying. But the monastics really exhibit the joy of Christ, because ultimately, if we really are keeping the commandments of Christ, and if we really are living for Christ, then even the biggest sorrows in life, they're not sorrows. We're able to exhibit joy in all those moments, and that's really what the monastics are like. They gave up everything and they have nothing. It's like they say in the scriptures, but they possess all things. And you really see that with their joy.
Now, in the monastery, there is a hierarchy, right? Even, they're all called sisters. There is a head nun. Talk a little bit about the obedience and what you have learned about that.
Obedience is a huge thing in Orthodox monasticism, and I learned a lot about obedience there. The sisters practice what we call cutting off their will. So they do complete obedience to the abbess, who's their mother, their spiritual mother. And they also do obedience to one another, and especially a nun will do obedience to an older nun, someone who's older than them. And this is all done in the context of learning how to really live the words, not my will, but thy will be done. Because if we're able to entrust ourselves to our spiritual mother and our spiritual father, then by doing this in a relationship that we can see, we can get better at doing it with God and being obedient to God, and really abandoning our will and doing His will and learning His will. And by doing obedience to our spiritual mother, like the sisters do to the abbess, then it frees them and it allows them to do complete obedience to the will of God.
We in our daily lives, we try to help people, we try to do good works. And when I was reading your book, what really struck me is when you talked about asking for help. I never really thought about the fact that we're so hesitant to ask for help, that for some reason, I don't know if it's pride or what it is, but it's something that you actually learned in the monastery, to ask for help, right?
Yeah, absolutely.
What does it do to us when we actually turn to another person and have them do something for us or help us with our tasks?
Well, I would say, first of all, it teaches us humility, because at the end of the day, that's the most important thing that we need to learn, is that I can't be reliant on myself. I need to be reliant on God. And the way that we can learn to be reliant on God is by relying on other people. And why wouldn't we? I mean, why would I think that I could help myself any more than someone else could help me? Because usually we don't see ourselves clearly, and we don't see our situations clearly, because it gets muddled with our emotions, with our opinions, with our will. And when we ask and we employ the help of someone else, especially someone who we respect and someone who exhibits, discernment and prudence, then it's a big help to us, and we're more benefited from it for two reasons: because we're helped by the person who's wiser than us, and because we show God that, I put my head down and I accepted the fact that someone knows better than I do. And all of those things help to build our humility and help us see who we really are.
What is monastics' attitude or mindset towards death? How do they treat that? Because obviously it happens there at the monastery as well.
Yeah, monastics have if it's done properly, if monastics sort of live properly, they have a very healthy relationship to death. Altogether spiritual, but it's very healthy. So they keep what we call memory of death, which is every day you try to keep before you the memory that today I might die, right now I might die. And it isn't in a morbid way, and by any means. It actually produces in us this very healthy and helpful way to live our lives each day, because we say the way the monastics live is by believing that today may be my last. We believe that today is our only chance to show God that we love him with our hearts, minds, soul, and strength. It's today is the day that I need to love my neighbor as myself. And so they don't fear death at all, because they know that death is nothing. It's just a transition into eternal life. What they fear is eternal condemnation, because after we die, we either go to a resurrection of life or a resurrection of condemnation. And so monastics only fear the judgment of God, that they fear being put on his left with the goats. They don't fear death itself, and so they live each day with this in mind, that today I may die, and have I kept the commandments of Christ? And when I go to the judgment, what will he say to me, and where will I be placed?
Wow. I just can't imagine. I remember when I went to a monastery, and just leaving that place, you don't even want to talk. You're just so, it penetrates. It's just part of you so much, that atmosphere, that holiness of those places. I can't explain it, but you try to do everything you can, at least for the first few days, not to lose that. What would be your advice to someone who had experienced it, or how can we, let me just rephrase it, how can we keep that holiness in our everyday life?
That was my question too. It was the last question I asked an abbess I visited before I left Greece. It's difficult, but there's so much we can learn from them. And if we go to a monastery with an open mind and with humble thoughts, and we're very careful with judging, then there's a lot that we can observe and we can take in, and then we can just tweak it for our own lives. So we watch monastics pray all the time. Well, we can pray more. We can pray while we work. We can be more willing to lend a hand to a coworker, to a friend, a family member. We can be more careful with our criticism. And these are practical ways that we can keep this holiness that we experience at the monastery, because it's all through our own actions that we're either gonna acquire grace or we're gonna lose it. It's our choice. God is there to give it to us. As my professor would always say, the pill is there for holiness. You just have to be willing to swallow it. So I think it's in practical little steps that we need to employ in order to keep this grace that we experience in the monastery. And then by these little things, then we can build on that spiritual holiness that we perceived from them, that we had in that environment. But also we can learn a lot from parishes, and from just speaking with Orthodox priests, like I think you have a local priest there at St. Innocent's Orthodox Church, and those things also help by bringing those back in, and by being in contexts in which it's not only at the monastery that we see good Christian works, we can also see it in the parish, and those things help very much for us to hold on to that holiness, which all too easily slips away from us because of our sins.
Yeah, well, that's beautifully said. Thank you. I did ask you about some of the lessons that I took away from it, but if you had to maybe sum it all up, or when you think of all the lessons you've learned, which one really stands out? What can you leave our audience with that maybe will encourage someone to visit a monastery, or to at least learn a little bit about that way of life?
It's hard to say. I learned a lot that I'm still processing, and that I'm still hoping that someday I'll get my act together and put into practice. But I think that I would say the most important thing I learned, and one of the most important things I would want others to observe and to understand, is it really is possible to become a saint. And we see this with the monastics. I saw it with the nuns. It's possible for everyday people to become saints, to truly keep the commandments of Christ. That it isn't theoretical. The Gospels aren't theoretical. It's very practical, and we're able to do this we're able to love our neighbor, we're able to love God with our whole being. We need to struggle to do it, but it's possible. And I saw that with the sisters, that, ordinary people, but completely extraordinary. They've changed themselves so much by opening themselves up to the grace that is given to those who love God. And I think that that's the greatest thing that I learned.
Thank you, Constantina. Today we talk to Constantina Palmer, the author of The Scent of Holiness. Beautiful book, Lessons from Orthodox Monasteries in Greece. Constantina, I know you'll be going to Greece soon again, right?
My husband's going back. Okay. I'll be staying actually in Canada.
Right. Well, still pray for us, and thank you so much for your time.
Thank you very much.
Fascinating. Well, coming up next, Dave Dotterer's back in the studio with us today. We'll be talking about, is there going to be a special session? How would he rate this last one? And what about PERS? All those fun things to talk about. Coming up next.
Hi, I'm Daniel and I work at theDove TV. Compared to Portland, Seattle, and LA, Medford might be considered a small market, but at theDove, we're excited about the opportunity to make a big impact right here in our community. And you help make that happen. Did you know that more than 90% of our income comes from people like you? You can help us now by making a secure online donation at our website, thedove.us, or by phoning 541-776-5368.
Well, welcome back, and Dave Dotterer's back in the studio with us today, and Dave has been involved in the legislature 3 sessions now, Dave?
Yep. 3
sessions, and this last go around, you were kind of the liaison between the 2 Republican caucuses, between the House and the Senate, primarily as it relates to budget issues, right?
That's correct.
Your overall lesson you learned, what did you think of the process? Is it like making sausage?
Yeah, it really is. It very much is, and the other thing that you notice is that knowledge really is power. Mm-hmm. And you see people who know how to work the system, and I'll keep this information to myself, and the excuse is this: well, we didn't get to that until the very end of the session, so then we had to make this quick decision because we got to get out of town. Mm-hmm. If you're cynical, you'll say, oh, they just held the decision until the end, spring it on everybody, and we need to get out of here. Yeah. I think that's a combination of a certain amount of cynicism and manipulation, mm-hmm. and on the other hand, there's a certain amount of, they're not very good at scheduling up there. Okay. I mean, you watch that and you say, well, you know what the start date is, and you know what your end date is. Can't you sort of back plan and say, we need to have the K-12 budget passed by this date?
Yeah, right.
That kind of thing.
Well, your military training, you're very regiment.
That's right.
A, B, C, D, and then all of a sudden you get up there and everything's liquid.
Well, that's right. That's right, and I recognize that. And so sometimes I say, now don't be too hard on these guys, because it's a legislative process, not an executive process. I was involved in it in a executive process, mm-hmm. and we didn't have 90 independent elected officials, all of whom have their own opinions on things and how it ought to happen, as opposed to, at the end of the day, I was the colonel and I made the decision, and that's where we went. My Marine said, okay, Colonel, that's the way it was. Well, that doesn't happen in a legislature, and that's okay.
Yeah.
I mean, that's fine. That's the way a legislature should work. You expect your representatives to represent you, and there to be huge differences of opinion like that.
Dave, you were involved in the previous session where it was split.
Yeah.
Which was perhaps one of the most productive sessions we've ever seen, in that they got along, they had to get along, they co-chaired all these major committees, and things happened. The next go around, the Democrats certainly were in the majority in the House and the Senate, and they had the governorship, and
you watched it and you thought, now wait a minute, you would think that with a 50-50 split like that, or a co-governance model, that wouldn't work. I mean, there was a lot of people who said, well, I don't think this is going to work. I mean, somebody's got to be in the majority. Yeah. Well, guess what? That's not what happened.
Yeah.
They really did make it work. And so I really was, I was disappointed, quite frankly, in this session. Yeah, it bothered me a lot to watch this, and it wasn't a matter of that the minority has no input. It's that it really is not, bipartisanship is not built into the process.
Right.
It happens episodically and only if a few people want it to happen. And as opposed to, no, wait a minute, you know, we have, for example, on the Senate side, if you look at the numbers, 47% of the Senate is the minority. Right. Well, that's pretty close to 50, so okay.
Let's get along.
Let's get along here. And they did better. They did better in the House. There's no doubt about that.
You would think that after coming through the session where it was 50-50, they learned some cooperation and collaboration, that just by gentlemanly being courteous would carry over into a session, but it didn't.
It did. No, it did. It didn't. It didn't at all.
So at the end of the day, it's really pretty hard and clad.
Yeah, it really is. And I don't want to make it sound like it was all bad. No, there was collaboration, and people they talked to each other and things like that. And on the other hand, if you're in the majority, you do have it is a legitimate position for you to say, well, you know, we did win the election and we're in charge, so okay, I got it. But you know, that doesn't mean that you exclude the other side. Let me give you an example. I was greatly surprised that the co-chairs put together their budget blueprint at the beginning of the session, and they put it together, and they essentially never went to Dennis Richardson, who had just done it with the same two people, and at least at some point gone to him and said, hey, Dennis, what do you think we ought to do? What's your input? What are your thoughts? And here's where we're going. What do you think? Now, they don't have to take his advice. They don't have to do anything about it, but you would think just, A, as a courtesy, and also it's just smart business to go, you know, let's go get a second opinion. We may not be right.
Yeah.
I mean, that's why I would have done things. I would have, you know, I would have at least asked them for their opinion. You know, again, you don't have to take it.
It didn't happen.
No, it didn't. And that's a problem.
It seems to me that it's got to be extremely frustrating. You only got so much money coming in, and you have these demands on all this money. And you just can't figure out how to handle it. It just kind of goes, well, wait a minute, we can't spend more than we take in, but they seem to be bent on doing that. Yeah,
the system is designed to do two things. First, spend all the money you have, and secondly, figure out how to rationalize that you need more.
Okay.
In other words, because there's all these groups out there, all these agencies, all these groups, and there's some conservatives, it's not just liberals, but I mean, there's all kinds of groups out there that have, you know what, if you just gave us a little bit more money, look how much more good we could do.
Yeah.
And there's that tremendous pressure. And the answer is, you got to learn to say no.
But the Democrats will always figure out a way to raise a fee, raise a tax, do something. You know.
They did that. I mean, they built it into their. What I found very surprising was, at the very beginning of the session, they came up with a budget blueprint and said, we need $275 million in additional revenue, taxes, to make this budget work. Okay, don't agree with that, but okay, that's your blueprint. Then later on, they get a revenue forecast plus a slight tax increase that gives them $290 million. So they're $15 million to the good, and then they come back and say, well, we need at least another $200 million. Well, wait a minute.
Yeah.
You had this budget plan that said you got more than you said you needed. Now all of a sudden you need more.
Yeah.
And that's the way you know, it's just, that's the. I guess that the best way to describe that, that's the inertia that's there.
Is it possible, and I don't want to be oversimplistic here, but is it possible, like from a business standpoint, the governor can say, wait a minute, I believe across the board in state government there's at least 10% waste. I'm going to cut everybody's budget 10%. Could it survive?
Well, yeah, they would survive. I'm not sure that that's probably, having been in the Washington bureaucracy when they've done that.
Yeah.
I mean, you know, I've watched that happen. For example, I was in the Pentagon one time where they walked in and Congress said, you will all cut your headquarters staff 10%. Okay. Okay. Now, okay, so where did you come up with the 10%? Well, we sort of thought you had too many people. So, you know, and so particularly as a Marine, since we're pretty lean, you start slicing 10% out of the Marine Corps, and it really hurts.
Right.
Now, if there's an Army guy sitting here, we'd say, well, that's unfair. Of course not. You know, you guys are no leaner than we are. Come on. You know, you can hear. So, anyways, that would be the argument. You could do it. Would state government survive? Yeah. Of course it would.
The only reason I ask that and bring that scenario up, we all know there's waste and there's just a lot of bureaucratic stuff that goes on. I mean, have you ever tried to go in and get a plan through a county or a city or a state or get a government agency to act in any lightning speed? The answer is no. No. You know, so what could we do to make it more efficient?
Interestingly, now there is, for example, the governor requested, and the legislature built into this budget, there is I forget the exact numbers, but there's built into this budget a reduction in every agency's budget. Operating budget for what he believes that he can achieve a 2% operating efficiency. Administrative efficiency, overhead efficiency. Now that's, and that of course depends on the program, because some programs have very little overhead. The money is, sent out to the counties or out to the needy or something like that. On the other ones that they have huge overhead. But I will say that kind of struck me like that's sort of along the lines. It's a shotgun approach, but sometimes, sometimes you just got to do it.
I know.
What I mean?
Dave Dotterer's with us. We're going to take a quick break. We'll come back. Is there a special session in the horizon? We'll talk to him about that and what ended up being the PERS policy. We'll talk to him about that when we get right back.
Hi, I'm Paula, and I work at theDove TV. Every day we get letters and emails from people who've been encouraged, blessed, and challenged by the programs on theDove TV. But we couldn't do it without you. Did you know that more than 90% of our income comes from people like you? You can help us continue to bring inspiration and hope to our community by making a secure online donation at our website, thedove.us, or call us at 541-776-5368.
Okay, we're back with Dave Dotterer, and Dave is really a special guy because he is, I don't think anybody has done what you've done by being a liaison between the Republican caucus on the House side and the Republican caucus on the Senate side in the Oregon legislature, and you were kind of like the budget hawk, you watch it. What an incredible experience,
Oh, it's really interesting to see the differences in personalities, and they may have similar political philosophies in a lot of ways, but they're just different groups of people, and the Senate is not the House, and vice versa. I mean, they're just different animals. It's interesting to watch that. It was all
right. Now we all watched. I had Dennis here. He gave it a very low grade. I don't know what you gave this last session, but Dennis gave it a very low grade. And you would too?
I would too.
A D?
I give it a C-. I'm not quite as hard as Dennis.
Okay. Well, still not a healthy score.
No, it's not. And he's seen a lot more than I have.
Yeah.
And so I got to go with what he's got.
Okay.
There's no doubt about that.
PERS was the big issue, and they seem to kick the can down the road. I mean, sooner or later, we got to deal with this, and we got to cut it down.
When I went back up, had gone back up to Salem, I sat down and talked with. We had this really bright young man, homeschooled by the way, just graduated from Willamette Law School, got his law degree, or passed the bar, and now he works in the Senate Republican office. Bright young man, and he is their PERS guy, and he went to this latest PERS board, and the PERS actuarial people, which is a private company that does this across the nation, very, very well respected, and these are the number geeks. These are the widget people, the geek people. Yeah. They said that there's a slightly better than 50% chance that in the next 20 years the Oregon PERS system will fail.
Will implode, huh?
Yeah, and so anytime somebody says to you that let's just round it back down to 50%. That there's a 50% chance that your system is going to fail, you better listen to that real closely. Now, of course, we don't know the future, but if I said to you, well, there's a 10% chance, you'd go, well, okay, that's okay. There's a 10% chance I'll get hit by lightning, or maybe or something like that. Right. But when something gets up to 50%, you go, and these are the actuarial experts that are doing these numbers. You say, you know what? We better listen to these people.
Well, look at Detroit.
Yes.
I mean, it's primarily a PERS issue, isn't it, that took the city down?
Well, it's benefits.
Yeah.
It's benefits.
Yeah.
And so, again, they did the PERS Light, and they really didn't do that much with it. I mean, you're right, they kicked the can down the road on almost half of what the, quote, savings were,
right,
which is going to end up actually costing the system more over the long haul. But it does help you with your budget problem in the immediate. So we're looking at just the immediate, not the long term. And the PERS board is making some changes. This guy told me, he said, you wait until the PERS board comes out in September. They're going to give their first numbers for the next budget cycle. And it's not going to be pretty again, because we didn't do that much. I
would assume that the average citizen in Oregon who are not benefited by PERS has no idea what this mess is about. Therefore, it never really gets pressured.
It's kind of
yeah. Excuse me. Go ahead.
No, I was just going to say it's interesting that you are really seeing an awful lot of Oregonians that are looking at this and saying, wait a minute here. They see Detroit, and it's a horribly complex system. It's a horribly complex problem. But I mean, just the basic idea that, you need to do something substantial here to fix this. I really believe the majority of Oregonians get that. And I wouldn't expect them to.
Well, I think we get the idea that we can't afford it.
Yes.
But we don't know how to fix it, because no matter where you cut, you're going to get hammered.
Well, that's true. That's true. And I would say that, for example, when I looked at it, I said, let's not get into initially an argument over the details of which little pieces we work with. You have to get to that eventually. But let's just talk about the number. Let's talk about the big picture. This PERS Light, just to throw some numbers at you, only saves $420 million over this biennium. And the original Republican proposal was $2 billion. Well, okay. Now, we
went from $2 billion down to $400 million?
$400 million. Now, you could make the argument, okay, well, let's split the difference and make it 1.2. Okay, that's a good compromise.
Yeah.
1.2 billion, still bigger than 400 million, and that would actually, that number would have reduced a PERS employer's rates in some way.
Wow.
What this does is it just doesn't, their PERS rates go up, they just don't go up as much. Okay, you could say, well, we saved some money. Well, okay, yeah, but you had all those big increases over the last few years. You're not undoing that. So again, those are kind of, I like to look strategically first at the big picture and say, where do we need to be? Well, we need to be at a big number. Okay, now how do we get there?
All right, is this political? Because it seems to me that if they have to go back into session to settle PERS, that could backfire on the Democrats going into re-election, because they didn't take care of it. And once the PERS comes out and all these numbers come out again in a special session, and they don't do anything about it, or they're forced to make even bigger cuts and compromises, that's not going to play to their base very well.
No, it's not. No, it's not. No, it's all political. Yeah. I mean, at the end of the day, of course it is. It's a democracy. Yeah. But, I think there's some serious-minded people up there that really do understand, just from a policy standpoint, look, we really got to do something here.
Do you expect a special session?
No.
Really?
I don't expect it. I mean, I give it maybe a 1 in 3 chance. I mean, it doesn't mean it isn't going to happen, but I give it certainly less than a 50-50 chance of happening, because there's this talk about this grand bargain, and the Republicans need to have need to agree to a tax increase. Here's the way I view that. What the Democrats have essentially done is they've threatened and made good on their threat not to pass needed, necessary PERS reform that they have the majority votes for, unless the Republicans give them the supermajority votes for an unnecessary tax increase.
Oh, geez.
And so you look at that and you say, well, I can walk away from that deal.
Yeah. Yeah, and then anytime you're the bad guy.
Yeah, then you're the bad guy. Well, wait a minute. Yeah. There's no deal here. If you the Democrats believe that you need PERS reform, then put it on the table, and if it's big enough, you'll get a lot of Republican votes.
All right.
If you do just another little incremental change, I'll bet you'll pick up some Republican votes. You may not pick up a majority, but you'll pick up some, and you can then claim it's bipartisan and move on.
Where's the governor on this?
Well, he's still talking about he wants a grand bargain. He wants a grand deal, and he's moving toward a little bit of, he's now put on the table a proposal dealing with the Republicans, if you remember, wanted a small business tax cut to help the small businesses. And so he's put a counter proposal on the table dealing with some capital gains, but the Republicans are going back and saying, well, no, wait a minute. That doesn't help small business. I mean, this helps big business. It helps Nike, but it doesn't help the mom and pop that are sitting around a kitchen table saying, you know, dear, why don't we start a business that does this? That takes, you know, some real tax reform, and that would not take capital away from them. And
all right. So if we're tied up, all this PERS debate, which is, you know, really more for me, it's the end of the argument. In the meantime, we still have high unemployment in the state. We're not attracting new businesses. What happened to the jobs argument?
Virtually nothing was done. I mean, I watched that with fascination, because if you looked at the press releases from everybody at the beginning of the session, it was jobs in the economy, jobs in the economy. Right. And then you started looking at what was being worked on. Well, we worked on the budget, and we worked on PERS and everything, but you sort of were waiting for, well, okay, somebody put a proposal on the table that truly is going to create jobs and improve the economy. And it just never happened. And it was partially, again, back to my disappointment with the process. What I watched the legislature do is the immediate overwhelms the important. And you have to pass a budget. I got it. But that doesn't mean you can't pass a budget and also look at these bigger issues.
Right.
And they're not. The legislature is not very good at multitasking, I guess is the best way to describe it. They didn't do anything on it.
I don't want to sound partisan here. I'm just trying to figure out what's in the brain of a liberal that would want to spend what they don't have. What's the deal? Am I missing something here?
Well, you know, remember, part of that idea is, you know, we can always raise taxes on some group of people that are well off.
And there goes the jobs.
Well, yeah, got it. But that's your argument. Their argument is, well, this is about redistributing income. What I can't understand is, why do you believe that if I take money away from a rich person and give it to the government, I'm redistributing income? I'm not. You know, you're just giving it to bureaucrats at that point. Now, eventually, that money might go down to some poor person and some program. I got it. I'm okay. You know, but it's the same thing. I'm always fascinated by watching that and thinking, how is giving money to the government a redistribution of income?
All right. Let's say there's a turnover this next session. I mean, you're going into the campaign season. The primary's in May. Election next November. What if the Republicans picked up one of the houses? Say that. Well, I don't know. The House. What's the spread in the House now?
It's 34-26. There's a four. That's pretty good. Now the Senate is 16-14. That could. You know, we're only one apart. That could change. That could change. Yeah.
So if one of the houses was won, it changes the picture, doesn't it?
Oh, absolutely, absolutely. And I would like to think we would go back to the last session when you did have that bipartisan. I can't make you do this, but I can stop you. So let's talk here now.
Yeah.
And, you know, okay. You know, that's a really dumb idea. Let me put something else on the table here. Well, that's a dumb idea too. Okay. Well, let's compromise. And we'll figure this out.
Okay. Yeah. Well, I just think that you know, we got to figure this thing out, because we're not attracting jobs. I mean, you drive around Jackson County. We are not recovering. Yeah, there's some building going on. There's some good things going on, but will we ever get back to where we were 10 years ago?
No. I mean, I grew up in Eugene, and you know, I go away for almost 30 years in the Marine Corps. When I came back, and I drive around town, and I go, well, this isn't the town I left.
Yeah.
I mean, all the lumber mills are gone. I mean, you know, you just go, this is crazy.
Well, Dave, thanks for your service in making yourself available and volunteering to do that job. I know it's been an incredible education, and we look forward to bigger and better things for you in the future.
Yeah, looking forward to it.
Okay. All right, we'll see you next time on Focus Today.
Hi, I'm Jim, and I work at theDove TV. Every weekday between 6 and 8 a.m., our award-winning news and sports team bring you the best morning show around. It's live, it's honest, and it's a whole lot of fun. And you help make it happen. Did you know that more than 90% of our income comes from people like you? You can help us continue to air local programs that share your voice by making a secure online donation at our website, theDove.us.